All right, well, we're here in Bodenstown burial grounds, Bodenstown churchyard, the tomb of Wolfe. And we spoke on the bus on the way out of the background of the United Irishmen, the failed rebellion of 1798, and the role of Wolfe. I wanted to just reiterate and talk about the connection between the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and the United Irishmen. There was a catechism, if you will, that the United Irishmen had that they would say. There are a few variants of it, but remember now, before the days of the internet and text messages and email, to communicate a political message, it was word of mouth, it was poems, songs, and there was this little thing that the United Irishmen would say. What is that in your hand? It is a branch. Of what? Of the tree of liberty. Where did it first grow? In America. Where does it bloom? In France. Where did the seeds fall? In Ireland. So there's the express connection of the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and the United Irishmen. We talked about some of those Enlightenment thinkers whose ideas informed the American Revolution and the French Revolution and the United Irishmen. And I want to talk a little bit about Thomas Paine, author of the pamphlet Common Sense, great American patriot. Paine was actually an honorary member of the Dublin branch of the United Irishmen. And in Tone's writings, we have the following statement from Tone about Thomas Paine. He says, "I have been lately introduced to the famous Thomas Paine, and I like him very well. He is vain beyond all belief, but he has reason to be vain, and for my part I forgive him. He has done wonders for the cause of liberty, both in America and Europe, and I believe him to be conscientiously an honest man. He converses extremely well, and I find him wittier in discourse than in his writings, where his humor is clumsy enough." So Tone talks about meeting Paine, and when we think of these two men, we think of great quotes that sort of summarize and epitomize their political philosophy. And so I'm going to give you some of Thomas Paine and then some of Wolfe. Here's Paine talking about the rights of kings, right? The hereditary monarchy. He says, "For all men being originally equals, no one by birth could have a right to set up his own family in perpetual preference to all others forever. And though himself might deserve some decent degree of honors of his contemporaries, yet his descendants might be far too unworthy to inherit them." So we think about hereditary monarchies and the weakness that comes from that. Again, Thomas Paine, "In the early ages of the world, according to the scripture chronology, there were no kings, the consequence of which was there were no wars. It is the pride of kings which throws mankind into confusion." And finally, he says as to the monarchy, "When a man seriously reflects on the idolatrous homage which is paid to the persons of kings, he need not wonder that the Almighty, ever jealous of his honor, should disapprove of a form of government which so impiously invades the prerogative of heaven." So Paine clearly not a monarchist. And then we come to the famous sayings and quotes of Tone, for which we remember him. He says, "To subvert the tyranny of our execrable government, to break the connection with England, the never-failing source of all our political evils, and to assert the independence of my country, these were my objectives." And then, most famously, "To unite the whole people of Ireland, to abolish the memory of past dissensions, and to substitute the common name of Irishman in place of the denominations of Protestant, Catholic, and Dissenter, these were my means." Tone spent a short time in the United States where he saw American democracy, our republic in action, and he had this to say: "America has neither king, nobility, nor clergy established by law, and it is, notwithstanding, I am satisfied, at this hour, the most flourishing and best governed spot on the face of this earth." And so Tone and the other United Irishmen looked to those examples of the United States and France for their idea of the ideal form of government, which was a republic. Now, I want to talk a little bit about graveside oratory. Right, there's been some famous instances of speaking at a graveside in Irish politics. Perig Pierce, who we're going to talk about in Dublin, gave a few of these most famous orations, and one of them was at the graveside of Jeremiah O'Donovan Rossa, who was a Fenian who had gone to America, died there, and when he died in 1915, the cable came across telling the Irish that, O'Donovan Rossa has died, and the message came back, send him home immediately for a funeral. And the funeral of O'Donovan Rossa in Dublin at Glasnevin, where we're going to go later this week, was really one of the critical events in the lead up to the Easter Rebellion of 1916. And Pierce famously, at that graveside, talked about what the vision was for Ireland. And he said, we know only one definition of freedom, and it is tones, coming back here to Wolfe tone. And he then gave the famous lines we all know in 1915, there at the graveside of O'Donovan Rossa. He said, they think that they have pacified Ireland. They think that they have purchased half of us and intimidated the other half. They think that they have provided against everything. But the fools, the fools, the fools, they have left us our Fenian dead. And while Ireland holds these graves, Ireland unfree shall never be at peace. So he was talking of O'Donovan Rossa's grave, but he may have been talking about Tone's grave, because it's in holding the graves of these patriots that the next generation would draw inspiration. And here in Bodenstown, we have to reflect that this may never have happened with Tone's grave, because he lay here in obscurity for some years. In fact, when his body was released, Lord Castlereagh said, well, you can have the body, as long as it's not attended by any big public show of a big funeral. I want him buried quietly. And so two cousins brought Tone here to Bodenstown, where his family had connections. His father had worked a family property here till he was later pushed out by his older brother, which caused some family enmity. But Tone had connections here. He had brought his young bride, Matilda, here, left her here when he went to study law. And so this was a place known for the burial of members of Tone's family. But he was brought here quietly and buried, and he lay here in obscurity, perhaps without even a stone, for decades. And it's interesting, after the failed rebellion of 1798, after Robert Emmet's follow-on failed rebellion of 1803, the tide kind of shifted away from physical force republicanism to constitutional political republicanism. There's this tension in Irish nationalism. And later on, we're going to go to Daniel O'Connell's home and talk about O'Connell. And really, a lot of the oxygen was taken out of the air of Irish nationalism after the death of Tone and after 1798 by the movement towards Catholic emancipation. Right? So Daniel O'Connell, we're going to talk about moving through the legislative process in Parliament to 1829 to get the success of Catholic emancipation. So the focus was there and away from physical force republicanism. And then some of O'Connell's followers started to militate back towards a more physical form of republicanism. And it was in 1843 that Thomas Davis, one of the young Islanders as they were called, came here to Bodenstown to find Tone's grave. And again, the power of words. Davis published a poem. I'm going to pull it up here. He published a poem about Tone's grave. And he, in the poem, described falling asleep with Tone having no great marker, no monument. And Davis describes falling asleep, and in his dream, there are young people, the people of Ireland are coming here to build a monument to Tone. And the last stanza here, really effective. Davis wrote, "In Bodenstown churchyard there is a green grave, and freely around it let winter winds rave. Far better they suit him, the ruin and gloom, till Ireland a nation can build him a tomb." And this was published, and within a few weeks of the poem being published, Tone's widow, Matilda, saw it in the New York paper, and she began a correspondence with Davis. And she was saying that, at age 76, she had always hoped to raise a proper monument to her husband and to join him here. And so thus began this concept of building a proper marker for Wolfe Tone. And we then see some efforts to do that. Different stones were erected over the years, some of them then taken away in pieces by people seeking a souvenir. But we see this sort of new emphasis on tone. And additionally, Matilda and her son published the memoirs of Wolfe Tone, 2 volumes. And that's where we get so many of these great statements, and we understand Tone's philosophy was in the autobiography that was published after the fact. And Tone was a very careful diarist. He was keeping track of all of these things as they were happening. In fact, one of the co-founders of the United Irishmen was also keeping a journal, and Wolfe Tone wrote, Russell is also keeping a journal. Mine is worth 50 of his, and he was right. The autobiography of Wolfe Tone is beautifully written, and it allowed people to see the man. Here was a young man in his 30s giving his life, leaving behind, as he said, his wife and family for the cause of Irish liberty. And the autobiography really resonated. And so you have the Young Irelanders and physical force republicanism, again, looking at Wolfe Tone and recognizing him then as the father of Irish republicanism. And so there began to be sort of these annual pilgrimages in June. 100 years after Tone's death, there was a big one. There was the Wolfe Tone Band, which is not the Wolfe Tones that we know today, but there was a Wolfe Tone Band. There were Wolfe Tone societies. The Fenians took to Wolfe Tone, and this became a place of pilgrimage, where every year in June, Irish Republicans would come and they would make speeches, orations at the grave of Wolfe Tone, and talk about their aspirations for an Irish Republic. So it's no coincidence that in 1913, Peregrine Pierce came here. He gave the oration at the tomb of Wolfe Tone, and he described this place as the holiest land in Ireland. And with apologies to our driver from Armagh, where St. Patrick and all of his associated places are, sort of the words of Pierce emphasize how important Tone was as the philosophical father of Irish republicanism. And when Pierce stood out in front of the GPO on Easter Monday, 1916, what did he declare? He declared an Irish republic, right? In addition to the tricolor above the GPO was the flag emblazoned Irish Republic. And so here, up until this date, we have annually Irish Republicans come to give speeches to commemorate Tone and to talk about their vision of the future of a 32-county Irish Republic. It's interesting that the 2 main political parties in Ireland derived from the Irish Civil War, right? The Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael parties are both nominally, arguably Republican parties. Over the years, they have come here. Sinn Féin, of course, has come here. And if you look back, some of us can remember in the heat of the Troubles in the 70s and 80s, there would be this scene where early in the morning, Sinn Féin would come to make their oration. They would leave, and then the official government delegation would come in and make their oration. So it's a place, this is really a historic place where many, many words have been spoken about what it means to be an Irish Republican. We think as Hibernians, one of our constitutional aims is through legitimate means to see that republic, the 32-county Irish Republic. And so for us, this is a special place where here we are on our Hibernian history tour. We look at the situation today with the partition, and we look to implement the provisions of the Good Friday Agreement. And I think it's only appropriate that Wolfe Tone, being the father of Irish republicanism, we think about the situation today. His goal to substitute the common name of Irishman for the names Catholic, Protestant, and Dissenter. It's what we're trying to do now in the north of Ireland as we look to the 32-county Republic of Tone and of Pierce and so many other Irish patriots. So thank you for your attention today. We'll take some time and walk around before we're on to our next stop on the tour.